The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, I'm Eileen Cavanaugh, talking today with Jan Waldron, the author of Giving Away Simone, a Memoir. Welcome to the program, Jan.
Thank you.
You have said that you came from generations of women who couldn't keep their babies. How did you find out about that, and what did it come to mean to you?
Well, it came to mean to me that I had no genetic precedent for mothers who stuck around. I found my mother's birth mother, her biological mother, about 2 years ago, and she disclosed to me the rest of the history as far back as she knew. And that's 5 generations of women, either through abandonment or adoption, did not stay with their children.
And so this must have colored your life and your feelings about adoption and...
Well, it certainly did. My mother was adopted, and I gave away my baby for adoption, so that even without knowing the history that went back 5 generations, I knew that there was something going on with my ancestors that I wanted to stop, which was that legacy of leaving.
Your family life, which was at first very loving and caring, later became truly unconventional, so much so that you talked about your childhood as being stage 1 and stage 2. Right. Tell us about stage 2.
Stage 2, we did. We had, I felt, a very happy childhood, an unconventional kind of bohemian-esque upbringing. When my mother became mentally ill, she withdrew from my brother and me, and we were left pretty much to bring up each other, so that we lived our life, sadly, without the help and support of adults. Pretty much from 11 on.
Does this mean all the nitty-gritty stuff, like getting the groceries in the house and getting to school in the morning? And
food, shelter, clothing, pretty much, yes. And my father had withdrawn also, so my brother and I pretty much brought each other up with babysitting money and his money earned from a library that he had worked in part-time. So we tried to make ends meet and tried to get each other through the day. And
so this, later on, we certainly learned, influenced your decisions that you made in your young adulthood. At one point you said that the struggles of your youth really led you to become a strong person, and yet you paid a very high price for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right now not an unhappy woman, and we, I believe, are the sum of our experiences, so I don't really regret anything that has happened. Again, it has been a high price, and I regret the damage that I've done to other people, such as the baby I gave away, and the hurt that I've caused. But I did learn what I could do, which is to be very self-reliant, and I'm not unhappy about that.
The trend toward single parenthood has become so entrenched. Do you see any cure for that, or any preventative things that we should be doing and we aren't? As a society, I should say. Right,
that's a pretty huge topic, especially now. I think that women, when I was younger, there's a part in the book where I talk about my biggest regret is not having made a choice when I was younger, to be passive, to going from kind of one passage to another without consciously deciding that I did want to have sex, or that I wanted to have a baby, or that I wanted to give that baby away. So I guess what I would encourage or urge young women and girls to do is to consciously look at the choices before them, because they're theirs to make. To put a lot of thought into, and to see them as choices, not being kind of falling into something by default.
But isn't this a time in life when kids don't give a lot of thought to choices, or don't reflect? This idea of reflecting and self-examination seems to me to be more a mature and even an older age kind of task.
There's no question that when teenagers, I mean, I have 2 teenage sons, they think they're going to live forever. And all I hope is that they will get through their teenagehood without causing life-threatening damage. you know, to themselves or to other people, and I literally just cross my fingers and hope that they get through it. They do think that they're going to be, they're going to live forever. And but I guess the only thing that you can do, and I think that lectures about all of that are too late in the day at this point. If they have a sense of purpose, that I believe gets taught in the first 10 years. And so what you end up doing the next 10 years is reminding them of those values and that sense of purpose. I think it's just too late for lessons by the time they're teenagers, and all you can do is give them curfews and hopefully they'll make them, you know.
So you're saying that those first 10 years, what psychologists usually term the developmental years, that's your time to make hay, so to speak, with your kids.
Yeah, I believe that. I do. I think that that's the time that matters most.
And that sort of speaks to family values, too. That's the time when you inculcate those family values.
Absolutely.
And hope that they take root and
That's
will
right.
bear fruit
Exactly.
in those teen years.
Mm-hmm.
You said in the book, I had made a baby to bring back my mother. Do you consider that your unique experience, or would you think that that is kind of the teen experience often, or the young adult who decides to have a baby really earlier than she might like?
Yeah, I think that mistaken pregnancies are often mistaken for mistakes. And I think that if young women and girls know anything, they know where their powers lie, and that is with our ability to procreate. So sometimes we cash that in and we use it to express ourselves in ways that would probably be more valuable or less valuable than to express our ways, what we feel, such as when I said that I made a baby to bring back my mother, I was having a major temper tantrum. So I created a crisis at which I was the center. And you figured no mother's going to walk away from that, right? And of course she did, and it didn't work. And I think, you know, going back to teenagers, I think when boys act out, they get arrested, and girls get pregnant. And we kind of dump our anger on ourselves within, and we do damage to ourselves. And boys kind of tend to act out. I mean, that's a massive generalization, but you know, that's what happens, and we use what we can. And I used what sparse language I had to call for my mother, which was to create a crisis, a pregnancy.
Well, and you termed it a crisis of choice. Do you think when young people choose a crisis that does not work, do they escalate to a more serious crisis then?
I guess it can go either way. And again, it's not, to use the word choice is not completely accurate because it is a subconscious choice. I mean, at 43, I can look back and see what I was doing at 17. At 17, I was certainly dazed and confused. And a lot of my acting out was very subconscious. It wasn't, well, I think I'll make a baby right now. I had to figure that one out. And I did. And sometimes it can escalate, and sometimes, for me, having the baby and giving her away caused enough sorrow and pain for me to reflect seriously, deeply for many years. And I didn't want to cause more damage.
Well, I assume when you say subconscious that you mean that most young women today, and even at the time when this happened for you, know about the availability of birth control, they know the facts of life, they know how a baby comes about. It's not a lack of education, so therefore is it fair to say that increased sex education is not going to be a preventative thing?
Yeah, I think it's very fair to say that. That's not the answer. We've had sex education in the schools for years now, and teenage pregnancies are reaching all-time highs. So, I mean, I had birth control pills, and I decided not to take them. So it's not like I didn't know how, and it's not like I didn't know how to prevent having a baby. I did, and I subconsciously chose not to do that. And also, when you feel isolated and alone or abandoned, you want to create your own carry-on company, which is to have a baby that will love you and need you. And so it's misguided at best, I think.
There's a vacuum, and you have the ability to fill that,
That's right.
that place.
Yeah.
You create a scene in the book in which you're pregnant, you've gone for a visit to the doctor, you've come home with some yarn to make something for the baby, and your brother rejects that whole idea of making something for the baby. And you said that this really influenced your giving the baby away to one of your teachers and his wife, who were anxious to have an adoptive child. And it struck me as sad when I read that small misunderstandings can affect life decisions.
Oh, most definitely, and that's why I've written this book. I think that one of the many reasons, but I think not talking, which is what we never talked about, what would happen with this baby when I was pregnant. As close as my brother and I were, I don't think we exchanged more than 5 words about it. And I was kind of looking around me for cues about what was the right thing to do, the right thing to feel, the right thing to say. And, we squandered a chance there to sit and talk and really decide what was the best choice here. And, it got buried and it got hidden. And so that's what happened. I had to rely on little hints like that. And it did. Look what, would that have made the difference? I don't know. But to look back and to realize, as you say, such a small thing unsaid, how large it becomes.
You said that a friend in the hospital told you that as an unmarried mother, doctors told her that they made the labors for unmarried mothers as difficult as possible in order to teach them a lesson, so to speak. It seems punitive, almost sadistic in a way. But as I was reading that, I thought about in 1995, when welfare reform is coming up, some of that strikes me as that theme of punishment again. Do you sense that?
Oh, I sense that very strongly. I think that this certainly was the story about my friend who had the same obstetrician telling her that we try to actually make them suffer, And that certainly was true of my labor. I was alone, absolutely alone, for 6 hours in a green room, not knowing what was happening to my body. It was labor. I think that it is...
Without any coaching?
No coaching, no nothing.
Prenatal
nothing.
parenting classes?
Nothing.
What year was this? Just
1969.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I saw 2 nurses, one for about 3 minutes, who was disgusted with me because I had torn my sheets and my bedding, my gown and everything from agony, and another who was kind to me for about 5 minutes. But so that prevailed then. It is revisiting us, and I think that motherhood in this country is an institution. Fatherhood is not. And I think when women make decisions about their own motherhood that are not in keeping with that institution, they are criminalized. And punitive is not too strong a word. I think that criminalized, trivialized, and punished in many ways. And I think that's, birth mothers in particular who dare to say no to this institution are really trivialized. And it is revisiting us, and it concerns me.
Your friend Lorraine said to you at one point that you'll live with this for the rest of your life. But isn't that true of a lot of decisions that we make, divorce, job disappointments? It's not as if we can always make the exactly right decision in life.
No, it isn't. And whether I made the right decision to give my baby away, that's a question I stopped answering and asking years ago. It's just part of what my life is. I think one of the reasons I've told this story, which is personal, is that I have had birth mothers tell me, if somebody had told me that this would hurt forever, I just wish somebody would have told me that this would hurt forever. And I guess this is part of the whole experience of adoption, that the first part of adoption is the experience of loss and grief. And it does stay with you forever. It's like an amputee in phantom pain. It never does go away. But it's important to tell the truth about it to yourself and to whomever else you choose to, and not to bury the experience out of shame or any of that. Because I think it's incredibly valuable and enriching to integrate the truth into the experience of adoption. And this is a female experience that has been concealed, because in America, that I'm aware of anyway, because there are millions of birth mothers in this country, and some people will tell you they don't even know what a birth mother is. So it's important to speak about it, I think.
You did subsequently decide to allow your teacher and his wife to adopt the baby you called Simone and they called Rebecca.
Right.
And your brother, interestingly enough, kept in touch with this family and visited Rebecca once a year. So you had some sort of loose thread. Did you have a conversation with your brother at that time? Did you ask about Rebecca?
No.
Or was this merely his?
It was something that he did and something I knew that he did, but in 11 years I asked about her maybe twice. I felt that if I asked about her and what he said was good, that I would implode, or if it was bad, I would collapse. So I felt really, really vulnerable about even hearing about her. I just was too fragile about the experience.
It seems as if in some ways you felt it was for the best that you gave the baby up for adoption, but at the same time you felt unduly pressured to do so.
Yeah.
It's like feeling two different ways at the same time.
It is. It's feeling, I realized ultimately that I was still too much of a daughter to be a mother. I can't tell you that there are days that when I look at Rebecca and I want to scream my way back to 1969 and never let her go. There are those days where I can't even live with the decision that I made. There are more days where I don't feel that way. That I realized at 17 I was dazed. I wasn't in any position to be a parent. But again, we are the sum of our experiences, and I'm not unhappy about what has happened.
That's an interesting statement, that you still have those feelings of daughter that were not filled, obviously,
Right.
because you had a withdrawn mother. Does this still exert? I mean, I would guess that would still exert an influence on one's life.
Well,
it's like I didn't get my fill of being a daughter.
Right.
And one should get one's fill of being a daughter before one
That's
goes on
right.
to be a mother.
That's right. I realized when I had my sons, my kept children, that I did feel fulfilled. And what happened in the interim as I became my own mother, I had some very good female friends, and the men in my life were very nurturing. So that I grew myself up, and I got used to that idea when I was young. I had many years to get used to it. And so I do not feel unfulfilled. I feel like, at a certain point, you see your mothers as people, as flawed people, imperfect people, and, love them for their brave lives, and then get on with yours.
And that's an important area of development too, to get away from seeing the mother as all powerful
Right.
and perfect, and to realize she's a human being and can fulfill some of your needs but not all.
That's right. Absolutely.
And that there are other people who can fulfill those needs that mother has not.
That's right. And I know I go through that with my daughter now. She's 25, and sometimes it's hard for her to see me past her place in my life. She sees me as the woman who gave her away and whom she loves and with whom she has wrestled with, as testifies the ferocious letters in the book. All of that, but sometimes it's hard for her to see me past her place in my life, that I am a human being independent of her, free of her. So.
Now we've come up to the time where you have made a decision to reconnect with her, and she's 11 years old. And she's Rebecca, not Simone. How did this come about?
Well, I had heard from my brother's friend Amanda that Rebecca wanted to meet me. And after I'd had my sons, I felt strong enough and safe enough to let that happen. So I wrote to her adoptive parents with the single concern for their wishes in mind. I said, if you are ready for this, when and if you are, I am. And we always knew that it would eventually happen. And within 3 weeks, we had made a date, and I met my daughter, or we met her.
Now it sounds like, at this point, it sounds kind of like a fairy tale. Everything's going to be wonderful, and it's going to be a happy reunion, and you're going to just pick up life. But it didn't work out that way.
Well, not exactly. Rebecca, for her, that's what, she was meeting her fairy birth mother. And a lot of adoptees imagine, my mother used to say she thought the tall, slim, blonde models in Life magazine, that's what her mother looked like. And another adoptee friend of mine says she thought her mother was Princess Grace of Monaco. And, you do imagine, when you don't know who your mother is, you have the luxury of imagining who your mother is.
Very best.
Right. So Rebecca thought she was going to come back and reclaim this mother of hers. And I was still kind of at the tail end of a numb out regarding this girl whom I had trained myself not to love. So the first day we just pretty much wanted to collapse into each other with grief. It defies words, even though I try in the book. But and then she got angry and she blamed. Now 11, 12-year-old girls, that's what they do anyway. But Rebecca had the perfect construct with me because I was an impeachable mother. I had committed the ultimate crime of abandonment. So she blamed and I absorbed until I finally stopped absorbing.
Did Rebecca want to know what you had named her?
Oh yes, yeah.
I've always wondered whether names have a significant influence on children's lives, and was there any wonderment about what would I have been like if I had been named Simone?
Yeah, she said she always felt more like a Simone than a Rebecca. I agree with you. I think that there sometimes is that kind of destiny about names, but and she seems like more of a Simone to me, but I guess that's our personal experience with that. But she is Rebecca because that's her parents named her that, and that's who she is right now.
One of the fascinating things for me was that you said, I always knew I loved my kept kids more. Mm-hmm. And I thought it said a lot about those 11 years and the bond between mothers and children, and how if we're birth mothers and have kept our children, we really don't see or understand that as much as probably you do, having reconnected at 11. Mm-hmm. I think of my own children in their particular stages, but I guess I've never thought about how it might have been if I had missed out on their first 11 years.
It's irrecoverable. I think a mother-child severance is truly irrecoverable. You can find each other, but you can't get back those years. And what you have, what a family is, of course, is first the desire to be one, and second, I think the work it takes to stay one. That the cultivated love over the years that I had with my son, I did not have with Rebecca. That's a chapter of her life I missed out on. And that's what she has with her mother, her adoptive mother. That's why her adoptive mother is her mom. I'm not her mom, I'm her mother. And to me, that's a big difference.
Did she want to know what her paternal heritage was as well?
Yep, she located, or, well, it was an awkward way how it happened, but she did meet her biological father about 1.5 years ago. Uh-huh. And for her, that experience has been negligible at best. She hasn't wanted to keep in touch.
Uh-huh. This reminded me a little bit of the hostage situation where spouses reported that when the husband came back especially after it was some years of being a hostage, that it was difficult for them to resume their family life because the husband had been having a very traumatic experience, a very different experience, and it was difficult for them to come together and put their life back together, and indeed, in many cases, divorce resulted. It seemed to me as if there were elements of that, if you think of the 11 years as even though you were careful to note that she had been raised lovingly and carefully with nurturing and
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, that's a very good analogy, because I do believe that it is a trauma of sorts for adoptees. You know, adoptees are, for whatever reason, children who have lost their original family. For whatever reason, like I said, you know, it can be for the better, definitely. It doesn't mean that it's a bad situation, but it is a fact. That's the fact of their beginning. And their beginnings are not wanted beginnings. That's a fact, too. Not that they were not wanted by their adoptive family, but they were unwanted before they were wanted. And I think that adoptees know that. As much as they are called gifts and special and chosen and all of these wonderful words, that really denies the authenticity of their experience. And I think truth-telling is key to surviving it. But it is kind of like that hostage situation. It's called in adoption language reintegration. And that is what Rebecca, which is kind of, for Rebecca and me, it was finding out who the hell we were to each other, what we meant to each other. Were we family? What kind of family were we? Those are the questions that I think we asked rigorously and worked on laboriously and have come to terms with pretty much.
in the book you said, I wanted a primer for mothering a reclaimed child, and yet I think that's what you've given to us.
I hope so.
Is a primer for mothering a reclaimed child.
I hope so.
And I think the book, which is beautifully written, just says a lot about that mother-child bond and about how important it is and what a struggle it is to reclaim that bond. But a struggle that has certainly seemed worthwhile.
Definitely.
And at the end of the book, Rebecca Simone has written, I forget whether it's an epilogue or an afterword.
Yeah, it's an afterword.
How did that come about? Whose idea was that?
I think it was both our ideas. I wanted her to have something to say about it, and she wanted to have something to say about it. She believed and supported from the beginning in the telling of this story. We both, when we see stories about adoption on TV or read about it or hear about it, we think our story isn't out there. Nobody's writing about our experience. It's missing from the current stories. So we both believed in the telling of the story, and I'm glad to have her with me there.
Rebecca's chapter just brought the book together beautifully, and now we're out of time, and I wish we could talk about it some more, but we'll leave it to the reader to read your book, which is a wonderful experience, and I hope all of you will go out and get a copy of Giving Away Simone. Thanks for being with us, Jan.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.